Well, hello friends, and welcome to another Ask ZAC. I hope you're all doing well during this crazy time. I hope this can be a good, fun distraction, and hope you're being kind to yourself and giving some grace to others during this, again, unprecedented time. I just thought it'd be fun to talk about some of my favorite records. These records really impacted me hugely, and maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't, but I hope you will take a gander and maybe take a listen. This will give you something to do. So yeah, we'll have a little fun. So first off, number one is Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. This is part of the Tiffany Transcription series, which were kind of more loose, and they did more jamming in them. It was recorded to be sold to radio stations to play, and this is volume 5, and it features Junior Bernard, who, it's kind of tough to pick a favorite string player, guitar player with Bob Wills, but if I had to pick, it'd be Junior Bernard, and that's because of his distorted tone and his kind of aggressive playing. And I think he was a big influence on Roy Nichols and a lot of other players. This was recorded in 1946 and 47, and yeah, it has a great live sound to it. It has a lot of energy. If I had to pick a favorite cut, it would be Fat Boy Rag, which is an instrumental that features Junior Bernard. Junior Bernard played an Epiphone archtop with 2 pickups that he ran to 2 amps, and he used a volume pedal. And he did like pull-offs, and you could tell that he was listening to Django Reinhardt and other things. And yeah, you really need to hear Junior Bernard. Fat Boy Rag. Yeah, this really made Western swing cool to me. Before, I thought it was a little too polite, a little too polished. And when I heard Junior Bernard, I was like, that's it. Because he had he was more aggressive, and he had that kind of distorted tone. Next up, Merle Travis. Of course, by the time, 70s and 80s, seeing Merle Travis, I mean, he was much older, and of course he died in the early 80s. Yeah, I think hearing this album, when he was really in his prime, in the late 40s, early 50s, it was really, it really blew my mind. Hearing his guitar tone, that Super 400 with those big, single coil pickups and the Bigsby on it, and the way he played, and this is just him playing electric guitar. There's no rhythm section, there's nothing, because it's solo guitar. I mean, that's that whole style of guitar playing with the thumb pick, the whole Merle Travis, Chet Atkins thing, it's supposed to be solo guitar. And that's what he did on this. And so you really hear the richness of that guitar and his playing. Probably the cut that you would need to hear the most is Blue Smoke. This was a big influence on a lot of the rockabilly players and a lot of the early rock and roll guys, even like Jeff Beck. Killer album. I'm going to try not to overuse killer or incredible, but it's going to be tough because these are all albums that really influenced me a lot, and they really impacted me. Next, Two Guitars Country Style, Jimmy Bryant and Speedy West. This album is even signed by Speedy West to my friend Bill, Speedy West. So this was signed to my friend Bill McCumber, who's a great pedal steel player, and who a mentor to me, who took me under his wing. And when I was wanting to play country guitar and I knew nothing about it, he let me borrow this big stack of records. And I used to play gigs with him, and he used to tolerate me when I first got my first B-bender, and I was just yanking on it like crazy, and just, he would just laugh at me. And sometimes he'd tell me just play the melody, or, maybe simplify that or something. But he gave me this album, and yeah, this is it's hard to believe, that this album was made, in like 1951. Just the recording sounds wonderful. Their tones, Speedy West's, tone, Jimmy Bryant, of course, probably the first big telly player. He's mainly using the neck pickup. We don't know what kind of strings he was playing. He's probably using round wound strings, probably 12 through 52, whatever they were putting on at the time. And just so you know, I've gone around in circles, and no one can say for sure whether it was round wound or flat wounds that were put on early Fender guitars stock. But the consensus seems to be that they think it was round wound. So Jimmy was probably playing round wound strings on his telly, probably 12 through 52. And apparently he liked those little jazz picks, like, the little Fender heavy ones like Danny Gatton and Roy Buchanan used. And used not a Tweed, he used a Wooden Pro amp. So before the Tweed amps, they had these really cool Woody amps. That's what they're called now. And they had a wooden cabinet, and then they had usually a metal strip down the middle, and then they had like a red grill cloth. And usually they had field coil speakers. And of course, the one Jimmy used was the top of the line Pro, which had a 15-inch, field coil speaker in it. So, just a wonderful sound. Golly, if I had to think about a favorite cut on here, it'd probably be Bryant's Bounce or Arkansas Traveler. I mean, those just, Jimmy was a ridiculously good player. The Sun Sessions. Everyone's probably heard Elvis, but how many of you have really taken the time to listen to the Sun Sessions? Okay, because we can all get bogged down in that late, that 70s stuff when he was really, he was not really in it anymore, and he was just kind of going through the motions, and it's sad. But this album, and then of course also the Memphis record that he made with Reggie Young and the Memphis Boys, I mean, to me, these are the highlights. And this is really, really influential stuff. And if you haven't heard the Sun Sessions, you need to listen. My favorite cut on here, besides, of course, like Mystery Train or That's All Right Mama, would be Blue Moon. And his voice, Elvis's voice, is going through some echo. Just really eerie, spooky sounding. It's a great sounding album. And if you think you know Elvis and you haven't heard the Sun Sessions, you need to listen to this. There you go. Chet. I love Chet Atkins. Who doesn't love Chet Atkins if you're a guitar player? It's hard to pick because, of course, Chet had many eras. Everything from smooth jazz to, of course, he had his earliest stuff with, Homer and Jethro, where he was playing really adventuresome, and you can hear that Les Paul and Django Reinhardt influence. You have the 60s stuff where he would, of course, did some classical Spanish things and was playing, straight melody and sometimes had strings behind it. You have the mid-50s stuff that's interesting because he actually has fiddle and pedal steel and things like that, like on the In Session album. And I love that album too. This album is great because it's just him with a basic rhythm section. And you can really hear his guitar and you can hear, the echo on it. And he's playing, just, of course, beautiful, clear, clean, guitar playing. The tones on it are fantastic. So, Mr. Guitar. All right. Okay. Now we're going out to California. We're going to Bakersfield. Buck Owens. Loved Buck Owens. I used to watch him on Hee Haw all the time. And I didn't really even realize what a great artist he was. I just thought of him as that corny guy that was, wearing bib overalls and saying, I'm a pickin', I'm a grinnin'. And then I actually heard, the seminal, 50s and 60s stuff. And, wow. Of course, the 50s stuff is where you have all that great Ralph Mooney, pedal steel playing on it. And of course, when you get into the 60s, then you get, where, Don Rich's guitar and harmony parts, you start hearing that, and they really, hit their stride, through the early to mid 60s was really their prime. And this album was cut right in the middle of that. And I love Trouble in Me. And of course I love I Got a Tiger by the Tail. Crying Time. Yeah, Memphis. I got to meet Buck and I got to play with him once. And it's the only time in my life I've been completely dumbstruck. I think the other time was when I met William Shatner. That was just kind of over the top. But, you know, I've met a lot of guitar players, a lot of famous, you know, musicians and singers and stuff like that. But meeting Buck was just kind of over the top. And Brad Paisley introduced me to Buck. And I couldn't say anything. And I think Brad was a little bit embarrassed. And he said, and I was wearing all black, of course. And Brad said, well, as you can tell, ZAC is a big fan of the Man in Black. And Buck Owens said, he said, well, you ain't going to find a bigger, you know, fan of Johnny Cash than me. So, but anyway, that was a nice moment when Buck and Brad kind of saved me when I was dumbstruck. Okay, Merle. Tons of great Merle Haggard records, but this is the one for me. The album before it has, you know, Swingin' Doors and The Bottle Let Me Down, which of course Swingin' Doors was Phil Baugh. Bottle Let Me Down was James Burton. This album is 100% James Burton. And you have everything from like I'm a Lonesome Fugitive, where on his red 52 Tele that he refinished red, the pickups were out of phase. And of course it had the old wiring, which meant he would, to get both pickup sound, he would have to carefully balance that 3-position switch. And when he did that, he would get both pickups, but they were out of phase. And that's the sound you hear on I'm a Lonesome Fugitive. So listen carefully to it and you'll hear, oh yeah, that's out of phase. Also, some of the Ricky Nelson stuff is also out of phase. Yeah, All of Me Belongs to You, House of Memories, Someone Told My Story in a Song. Yeah. Favorite Haggard album. Albert King. With Booker T and the MGs, produced by Al Jackson Jr. This is the one. I mean, for me, for Albert King, it's where everything came together. Great songs, great production, great band, great performance. My favorite is Crosscut Saw because of what Al Jackson did rhythmically on that tune, and Albert's, you know, tone on that. It's fantastic. I've always wondered if maybe he used, you know, Steve Cropper's Harvard or what. I don't know what he, you know, he was probably playing his Flying V. There's rumors that he used one of Cropper's Tellies into the Harvard on some of it. So we don't know, but some of it certainly sounds like humbuckers into a Tweed or a Super or something. But another great. All right, Emmylou Harris. Never heard Emmylou Harris before when I was a teenager, and heard an Eric Clapton record called Just One Night. It was a live album, and I certainly even as a teenager, I knew what Clapton sounded like. And then you heard this other guitar player, especially on like Further On Up the Road or Setting Me Up, where Albert Lee actually sang. But found out, of course, the guitar player was Albert Lee, and of course, pre-internet. I went to a used bookstore. It was called Half Price Books, and they had a location in Corpus Christi, Texas. And I went there and I bought every old guitar player magazine that they had, and they had a stack of them, and they were like 25 cents each. And so I probably, spent $20 or $30 on old guitar magazines. And out of that, there was an article on Albert, and talked about some of his favorite players. And then it mentioned a lot of albums that he played on. And of course it mentioned a number of albums that he played on by this Emmylou Harris. Well, I decided, I better check out one of these Emmylou Harris records. So on a family trip from Kingsville to El Paso, we stopped off in San Antonio, and I begged and pleaded if we could go to Apple Records, which was my favorite record store in San Antonio. It was on San Pedro. It's no longer around. But we went in there, and I was looking around, and my dad told me as I was looking, he said, "I'll buy your records today." And I knew it was going to be a good day because I didn't have to spend my own money. My dad was taking care of my records that day. So anyway, I saw this, and on the liner notes, said, Albert Lee played on most of them. And then there was that guy, James Burton. I said, oh yeah, I know who James Burton is. So he played on 2 cuts, but the rest of them were all Albert. And then to boot, you probably can't see this, but there's a shot of Albert playing a blackguard. And of course, it was a 3-hour drive back home from San Antonio to Kingsville. And I just stared at this and looked at and read it over and over again. And finally we got home, put the record on the record player, put the needle down. The first cut was you heard that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, that intro to Luxury Liner. And it completely floored me. Another, of course, it has Poncho and Lefty. This is a wonderful must listen to album. All of my friends hate You Never Can Tell, C'est La Vie, because in college, I played the song nonstop because I was trying to figure out how to play the solo. And I did learn how to play the solo note for note, but but they, of course, hate it now. Because I had my B-Bender equipped telly just playing that over and over again. And that's actually the album, Luxury Liner, that's the album that made me go out and buy a Telecaster and wanted a B-Bender. Delbert McClinton, live from Austin. This came out on Alligator, but it was a Austin City Limits episode. And so I both saw it on TV and a friend of mine gave me the cassette of this. And this album really floored me. It made me love kind of Texas Roadhouse music, for lack of a better word. Horns and great, kind of R&B, blues, kind of rocking guitar parts. And this album has 2 great guitar players, David Millsap and Stephen Bruton. David kind of let Bruton kind of take the spotlight, and so Stephen Bruton took most of the solos on here. And I vividly remember him, watching it on TV because he had an all-black Telecaster with binding, and it had a Parsons White B-Bender on it, and he used the B-Bender in a very non-country way. It was very cool. And he had like a tweed super and a black face Vibrolux, and he had some kind of like one of those old Ibanez multi-effects units that had the little rack-mounted thing and the attached pedal board. He had that, and he played fantastic. Tons of great solos on here, but I really enjoyed his on the Otis Redding tune, I've Got Dreams to Remember. He actually played a Fiesta Red Strat on that. And he was playing those kind of Steve Cropper, kind of 6/8, kind of, low arpeggiated parts. And it was just fantastic. Floored me. Of course, Bruton is loved by many here in Nashville. Everyone that's ever worked with Delbert McClinton loves the late Stephen Bruton. And I, of course, bought many of his albums and loved his playing. And sad I never got to meet him. These are honorable mentions now. Lester the Roadhog Moran and his Cadillac Cowboys, live at the Joni Mack Brown High School. This is a comedy album. It's the Statler Brothers, and this is the perfect album for times like these. Just find this on Spotify, find it on YouTube, just listen to it, just enjoy it. If it doesn't make you laugh, then, slap yourself. Do whatever you need to do. This is a great album. The guitar player's name is Wichita, so if you hear people joking about calling a guitar player Wichita, it's alluding to this. There's all sorts of little jokes that are on this album that tons of performers, joke about to this day. So if you haven't heard this album, you need to hear it. And it's easy to find. And it's great. And thanks to the guys at Clausen's Music in Corpus Christi that clued me into this album. So, all right. J.D. Simo got me this next album. We usually give each other albums on our birthdays. Our birthdays are a day apart, and it's coming up in April. I'm on the 24th, and I don't think we'll be able to get together this year. But a couple of years ago, he gave me this one, and of course, being from Texas, I was very familiar with the fabulous Thunderbirds, but I was mainly familiar with the Tough Enough era. And that was great, but I had never heard this album. And so, this was their first album, and it is a true gut bucket blues record. I mean, it is just, you know, the four of them, and it sounds ridiculous. I mean, it's like a Muddy Waters album or something. I mean, it's great. I know it's a couple of white guys playing blues, but they're slaying it. And, you know, of course, Jimmy has said over and over again that he actually used that 70s telly, you know, on the album. And, yeah, it's a great one. I hope y'all are familiar with this one, J.J. Cale, Naturally. You know, a friend of mine in Houston clued me into this album, and, you know, this is another one of those records you can just kind of keep flipping and flipping and flipping and listening to it. It has such a great vibe to it. The songs, the playing, it's got everything. And of course, you know, a lot of these songs were covered by other people. They Call Me the Breeze, of course, my favorite. And I love the fact that you hear that really primitive drum machine at the beginning, you know, and it's great. Yeah. What's not to like about J.J. Cale? And this is our last one. My Aunt Lissa Davis in Albuquerque, New Mexico, clued me into this. In the 80s, she had a Toyota SUV, and she listened to this album all the time. Willie Nelson, Stardust. Of course, it wasn't until a couple of years ago I asked her about it, and she said, oh, it was jammed in there. And she said, I loved the album, but, you know, it was like it was jammed in there. She couldn't get it out, but it would keep playing. So for years, she listened to Willie Nelson's Stardust album. And so a number of years ago, of course, I picked it up on vinyl. And this is such a soothing album. And such great production work by Booker T of Booker T and the MGs, Booker T. Jones. He produced it. Just his take, you know, Willie's take on all those classic, you know, this kind of started that, oh, let's do the American Songbook. Well, I mean, as far as I can tell, this is probably the first one that really did that. And of course, the record label didn't want to put it out, and it ended up being, you know, selling, you know, millions of copies. But this is a great one. And if you haven't heard it, or if you haven't heard it recently, you just need to put it on. So, well, guys, thank you for, you know, kind of listening to me kind of have fun reliving some of my favorite albums of all time. And, yeah, comment below on some of your favorites. You know, put a list of some of your favorite albums. And if you haven't heard one of these and then you hear it and it moves you, tell me. All right. Well, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.